The chapter I abandoned. Ooh, that's a hot topic. Today we have Cheryl Crumb of Cheryl Crumb & Associates, and we're going to learn a little bit more about her chapter and why she abandoned it, or did she abandon it? Today on Behind the Book. Let's dive in. I'm Heather Andrews, and on Behind the Book, we journey beyond the cover. On each episode, I dive deep into the minds of authors, unlocking the mysteries behind their literary creations. Discover the stories behind the book exclusively here with me. So the chapter abandoned. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that meant for you?
Yes, so the chapter that I abandoned was the chapter that I worked on in January, February, and March. And it was so painful. And I felt like I had to learn how to write all over again. And I think Jen and your team and you must have been feeling great, patience, but pressure as I kept on coming back for rewrites. And that was the one that I ended up having a middle of the night epiphany and writing another one.
Yes.
The modern day version of Jekyll and Hyde. Yeah, cultural twist. So I still think, Heather, that there is so much merit in the bones of the chapter that I abandoned.
Yeah.
It was about culture, but coming from a different perspective. I was looking at it through the lens of the many countries that I had worked in. Mm-hmm. A book you might want to read, since you are a bookaholic, is a book called Cultural Mapping, The Cultural Map by Erin Meyer.
Okay.
And I was introduced to the book several years ago. I've attended several workshops that Erin has put on, and she has a premise that says, not only do we differ, by the language we have or our facial visages, but every country is different from other countries on 8 different dimensions or scales, on communication, on how we give negative feedback, how we approach conflict, how we deal in either a hierarchical or egalitarian way, how we schedule, how we persuade. And it was fascinating to me because I have been working in 19 countries. And I certainly understood that the way I trained in countries had to be very different.
Absolutely. And I think the reason when you first came and you were talking, when we first did our first coaching session, when we were talking about the chapter for the book and what best fit, the thing that resonated with me the most was you talked about cultural cuisine. You talked about the different cultures and how, and culture revolution as a whole was really about, growing up in culture. That's a culture. And then we're born with our DNA, and that's a culture. And then each corporation has its own culture DNA.
Right. And
I thought the beauty around your chapter in that space was, we're each a different culture on this planet. And then now we're into a global capacity and community because companies have corporations in every country, and there's the conjunction. And when you talked about how you were coaching all these different things, it was just like, holy, that's the epitome
Yes.
And the bigness of culture, and how you bring those teams together to work in a wholesome way and an effective way, and how to be understood. And I believe that when you had that expertise, it was like, But what made me think even more about it was when I lived in Saudi Arabia, mm-hmm. and I worked in the medical profession over there back in mm-hmm. the late 90s. I'm going to just make myself a little bit younger.
Yes.
But really I was in my 20s, and we had 27 communities, ethnic backgrounds, in a department.
Yes.
And how do you all communicate, right? And that was the thing that I loved about your chapter, the first one. But it was a big, big topic.
Yes.
And we were trying to condense it into 2,500 words. and so when you talk about but you did it, and you did it in such a beautiful way that was impactful and comparable.
Thank you.
And I think, but as you said though, there is it's not really abandoned, but it sets the stage for what's next.
Exactly. And I kept on thinking, as you know, it reminded me of a coaching assignment I had with an engineering manager in Germany. And this individual was working with a team of colleagues, part of his own department, who were from Italy, India. He had some fellow German engineers. He had somebody from the US. He was dealing with suppliers who were from China, and his external customer was located in the US. And the challenge that he had was that he was a talented leader. But everything that he had done up until that point was in Germany.
Right.
And he discovered that, and couldn't understand why what had worked for him for decades was no longer working.
Right.
So it was a tremendous aha for him as we talked about, you know, the different dimensions. And you know, for example, Germany is from a communications point of view, a very low contact, direct, explicit culture. And he was working with suppliers in China who are very, let's call it high context, nuanced, layered. And they're fine when they're speaking with other Chinese people, but the twixt and the twain did not meet.
Right.
And then we, you know, added the complexities of where India was, and how do you convey bad news?
Yeah.
And how do you work through hierarchy? Germany, for example, is a little bit more hierarchical than we are in both Canada and the US, but nowhere near as hierarchical as China is, or Japan.
Right.
So what that meant is he was trying to be buddies, but they don't want to be buddies with somebody who is at a higher level than they.
Right.
So they were rejecting him as their manager because he wanted to go drinking with them.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating view as the world gets smaller.
Yes.
And you know, as I said, I'm fortunate enough to have traveled to so many cultures and worked with individuals that I'm able to help them see what they need to do to modify their behavior when they are working with someone who looks at things from a completely different way.
Yeah.
And you were very correct, Heather, when you said it's the culture we grew up in and we were educated in. So, for example, I was brought up in the US, and people might think Canada, the US, but there are some differences between the two, not just politically or socially, but also some distinctions. You know, we in Canada, for example, we're less hierarchical than the US.
Yep.
We're more egalitarian.
Right.
So it's intriguing as we can give some tips. So I think once I'm not restricted to 2,500 words, then I can start telling some of the stories and some of the examples that have helped my coaching clients.
Crumbs of wisdom.
There we go. Why didn't I think of that?
Crumbs of wisdom. I love it. It's so good. I think the thing that I love about you is that it's an experience based, and even just with talking to you during our coaching sessions and going back and forth in your chapter, and a lot of the other, but you particularly, was the fact that of the travel and it made me think about, you know, as people grew up in different facets. And I mean, I live in the world of story. I live in the world of culture. And I deal with people globally. We've had people from Ireland and Philippines and UAE publish with us. And there's just different, like you say, like there's different views of way. But when people come to you and from healthcare management into the world of publishing, which is kind of a huge jump, but it's all happened very organically, really. And I keep saying that I'm here by default, but I guess I was meant to be here doing what I do. But it was every employee that I ever had, or every person that I ever led that came to me, they all had a different background, culture, story that made them communicate and have a certain way of how they understood things, how they liked to be communicated to, how they received recognition. And when I started to meet people at that way, and I started to have those conversations about like, what makes you tick? What is the best way that you like to receive this? What is the best way you like to receive that? I think when I stepped into my one management role, I think I spent the first 6 months just walking through the staff. And setting up times with them and saying like, hey, I really love to know more about what makes you.
That's so smart.
And by the time, and even though I got restructured, but I had implemented workflows, I had implemented like 3 different ways of communication so that it hit every mark and I had 100 people on my team. And I had 2 other managers that I worked with, but we had a well-oiled machine. And everybody knew, and there was team leads and things like that, and it worked like a well-oiled machine. And I knew, and it's much like this book, I knew the story of every single one of them, but I also, and every single one of my authors that's published with me, I know the story behind them.
Well, and what you also bring to the party, goes back to the temperament we were talking about and encoding in your DNA. You are a sociable individual, which means that you have a sensitivity and a connection and an empathy. So you're able to pick up on, you were able to pick up in Saudi on those 18 or 15 or different, that something was different. And that's a gift, and I think for all of us, what we need to do is leverage those strengths. We can adapt behaviors so that, we can be more effective in our weak areas. But leverage that. You have that working for you. And that's obviously what has made the journey so organic for you and so natural, because you are the element that has flowed between both those roles. And they're all about helping people succeed.
Absolutely. Well, and I always say in the world of healthcare that, and throughout these interviews, we've talked about, like the colors, right? And blue, green is always of service and compassion. But I always say, like, any person that would walk into an x-ray room of mine or a mammography room when I was in those spaces, or even in management, I never got out of the room less than 2 minutes, because they always felt like they had to tell me their life story. Of course. Which is fine. I'm totally good. Just share it with me. I'm good. If that's where you need to put it, and it's a safe space, and that's what it's all about.
That's
and we created that safe space in Culture Revolution, and that's why we've had such success. We created the culture for the book.
And psychological safety, is one of the concepts that is in our book that was written by one of the colleagues. And that's, again, we do that through our behavior. We do empowerment through behavior. We encourage it or we discourage it. So culture is behavior, and we can control our behavior.
So as we wrap up, where can people find you on social media?
Well, they can find me at ccrumb.com, my website. Matter of fact, there's a new section in there about this book, so I'm proud and pleased about that. They can also find me on LinkedIn and Facebook. So I look forward to hearing from those of you who are excited about culture.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much. And you have spent the last 4 episodes hearing from Cheryl and Cheryl Crumb of Associates, just all about the wisdoms of culture and the rules of Crumb, to the chapter dive, to customers for keeps, and the chapter abandoned. And there's more for Cheryl. So make sure you follow her and reach out to her on LinkedIn, and make sure that you grab the copy of the Culture Revolution book on Amazon. Till next time on Behind the Book. Welcome to Behind the Book, where I am your guide, Heather Andrews, unraveling the captivating stories from behind the pages. Join me as I sit down with authors from the literary landscape to delve into challenges, inspirations, and untold tales that breathe life into their written worlds.